Hi all and welcome to this chess news video. So today I want to take a closer look at what's going on at the St. Louis Rapid and Blitz, also dubbed the St. Louis Rhythm and Blues Chess Tournament that's currently being held in St. Louis, Missouri, USA. Okay, in particular I want to take a look at a game that was played the day before yesterday between Viswanathan Anand and Hikaru Nakamura. Nakamura, I want to say, of course. Never mind. So, without further ado, let's get right into the action. So, here we have it. Anand playing with white, Nakamura playing with black. And we enter the game after black's 12th move, d6, d5. Now, with that move, he is creating some tension in the center, of course. And he is doing so without having castled yet. Now, that is not the end of the world. But Anand now plays quite a nice positional idea. He starts with exchanging on d5, and Nakamura, who wants to keep his two central pawns abreast, recaptures here with the c-pawn. But now here comes the point of Anand's maneuver. He plays d4, and with this move d4, he is saying to the d5 pawn, "Dear d5 pawn, you will be stuck for the rest of the game on the d5 square. And please note that I'm already attacking you twice. And if you give me the opportunity of exchanging pawns on e5, then that will also open up the semi-open d file for my queen. So now I have a very nice target to attack on d5. And later, after the game, when Anand came down into the St. Louis chess commentary cellar, he said that around this point he really very much enjoyed white's structure, and that this is, well, obviously a plan, an idea that he's very familiar with, and that he really likes to play against these Ruy Lopez structures. Well, of course, black is not going to allow the semi-open d file to be opened up, so Nakamura played here e5, e4. But that creates another target for white, really. And subsequently, Anand here played f3. And in doing so, he further puts pressure on black's center. He wants to exchange, and well, if black would recapture with the knight, then still the weak pawn on d5 would be there. And if black would recapture with the pawn, then amongst others, that would also open up the beautiful diagonal for this bishop here. And last but not least, exchanging on e4 also opens up the semi-open f file for his rook. So we can imagine why Anand really likes to play against these black structures here. Now, Nakamura replied here with queen d6, and this is what you could call a bad move, even though, and this is what I say to all my students, if you're being attacked, please try and counterattack. Now, of course, this is a very serious counterattack, because black is threatening to crash through on h2 and virtually win the game on the spot. Then why, you may ask, is this still a bad move? Well, black goes on the counterattack, but he is ignoring the pressure on his center, and of course the threat against h2 can be very simply parried by white, and we'll see in the next move how he does that. But that's not all. He is also counterattacking while he still has not finished his development. Look at his king, it's still in the center, you know, and also his rooks and his bishop are not really playing, where white, I feel, is already better coordinated, notably because of the fact that he has already castled. And last but not least, on d6, and let me get rid of all those colors and arrows, on d6, the queen is a target for the knight. So the knight is going to win a very, very important tempo once it lands on f5. And if that's not enough, the knight will also be hitting this undefended g pawn. Okay, so, well, if queen d6, then what would have been a better move? I think a better move would have been bishop e6. This at least doesn't put the queen on a vulnerable square. it tries to finish development by first developing the minor pieces before the major pieces, and it also somehow consolidates black's center, most notably the pawn on d5. That is a structural weakness in and of itself. Then, for instance, after f takes e4, which is white's plan all along, black can recapture with knight takes e4, and then after queen f3, putting further pressure. Black still is quite safe after castles, even though I clearly prefer white's position after knight f5. But things are really not so bad. I would just consider this a nice opening advantage where white has some strategic initiative. But it's nothing like the game position where black had really a bad position after queen d6. Okay, so going back to queen d6, we see g3, which is a very decent defense against the battery that was threatening to take here at h2. Now, you may see this move queen d6 coming and say to yourself, oh, horrible, then I'll have to play g2, g3, which is a very weakening move, you know. For instance, it will allow black's bishop into h3, hitting white bishop. And maybe later on it will also be a target for black's h-pawn. Maybe he can go h5, h4, takes g3, opening up the h-file. Oh my god, I'm already in a losing position. But someone like Anand knows that that's science fiction. Because after g3, yes, it is black's move. But white, again, is much better coordinated. He has already finished his development. And his threats to black's center are much more direct, much more urgent, much more serious than all of black's dreams that I've just outlined. One threat, for instance, here is not just to take on e4 and play positionally, but another threat is also to play the very brutal knight takes d5, and when you recapture knight takes d5, to play f takes e4, when we would have two huge central pawns and also huge pressure here down the Italian diagonal and the semi-open f-file, and white's pieces would simply spring to life. Also, the white e-pawn could go to e5, you know, simply block out those dark squared pieces, and the bishop could come to life, the queen could come to life. I think that would already be a clearly winning position for white. So the time factor is very important here. And chess is much more a concrete game than it is an abstract game. So we can start philosophizing and dreaming about the position like this. But if you see that g3 simply defense against the mate keeps your own threats alive, and when you figure out that your own threats against, in this case, black center are much more urgent, then you will have the courage to play a move like g2, g3, or even the courage to allow a move like queen d8, d6, threatening h2. Now let's see what would have happened if indeed, for instance, black's bishop would have landed on h3. Then white says, I don't care, you may have your agenda, but I have my own agenda and I will push it first, and your problems are much more urgent than mine. Let me just continue by breaking down your structure. Okay, you take my rook, but now I have this in-between move which attacks your queen, right? So that takes precedence over everything. And then if you play, for instance, queen a6, trying to set up some sort of a connection with your bishop on f1, then first of all, white starts regaining material here on f6. Now his threat is also to take on g7, and his threat is also to take on f1, and his threat is also to take on d5 with the bishop or with the knight. And again, even though he would be the exchange down, he would already have some pawns in return and be left with a strategically winning position. So what can black do? You know, he's running after the fact, so to say. He can try and get his bishop out, bishop c4, but then, hey, we continue with another in-between move. We take on g7, completely ruining black's pawn structure over there, and then after rook g8, Knight takes bishop, bye, beautiful bishop, and then after d takes c4, we can also try and start to smoke out white's king. Excuse me, black's king, which is still in the center, right? Bishop a4 check. And now after, well, I don't know, king d8, it's just a matter of white developing his pieces and starting to really encircle black's king. Here he has already 2 pawns and a bishop for the exchange, so materially there's absolutely nothing wrong with white's position. And don't forget that this is a huge strategic weakness, but there are also many other weaknesses here. And this position can be considered a clearly winning position for white. Okay, so then after g3, black didn't go for bishop h3. He also didn't go, for instance, for h5, which was the other idea, right? Because then knight d5 is extremely strong, and we already pointed out that such a structure, well, you can start with bishop f7 check, for instance, e4, e5 is coming. This is a clearly losing position for black as well. So after g3, Nakamura played more wisely. He just simply castled, and in that sense he brought his king into safety. Now basically what remains is to bring the bishop to e6, for instance, and he would have finished development in quite a nice way. But it's Anand to move. Here again the time factor. F takes e4. Now after knight takes e4, then there's knight d5 again, and this pawn will fall. So d takes e4 really is forced. But as we have seen already, this opens up the long diagonal towards f7 and g8. Now I notice I say long diagonal. The long diagonal is really this one, yeah, when we say that. But very often we also refer to these diagonals, these Italian diagonals, as long diagonals. But let's call them Italian diagonals. I think it's a little bit more appropriate than long diagonal. Anyway, I think you know what I mean. But here comes, of course, knight f5, kicking the queen. Now, since the rook on a8 and the bishop on c8 are not playing, Nakamura decides, oh, this is such a strong knight. It's hitting my queen, it's hitting all those dark squares, and not just by itself, but also in conjunction with the c1 bishop. I simply cannot live with such a dangerous knight, so I'll have to remove it. But that of course means giving up the bishop pair, and it also means that in the long run you will just be weak on the light squares. Note that, for instance, taking a time out and just simply moving the queen out of the way, let's say queen d8, is already too late, because the knight is too strong, as it turns out. Knight h6, check, g takes h6, and then bishop takes h6 also leads to a completely winning position for white. Okay, so back to the game, where after knight f5, bishop takes f5 was played, and then of course rook f5 was played, but this already sort of frees up the first ring for other major pieces to come behind the rook on f5. And I think Nakamura now plays another mistake, after which his position really becomes critical. He plays here rook a to e8. Now this seems to make sense, because it develops the rook that was not doing anything. It also puts the rook behind his passed pawn, you know, which is strategically the correct thing to do. But the problem with this move is that it allows white some more attacks, and also that it locks in this rook. If rook e8, then probably I would have played the other rook, so the f rook to e8, so that that would leave some more room later for the king that's going to be in a bit of a tough spot there. And also allows for the rook on f8 not to be incarcerated as it is right now. Now there was nothing wrong with, again, tickling the queen, which has remained a target. It was not just a target for the knight, but it's also a target for the bishop. Anand could have played here bishop f4, and then after, let's say, queen d7, you have to guard the bishop. Play could continue with the very thematic rook takes f6, exchange sacrifice, completely ruining black's kingside structure. And then after gf6, bishop h6, it turns out that, well, already the rook on f8 is lost, right? Which was one of the reasons why it's probably better to have played the other rook to e8. But also that since the structure is now completely ruined and white is a pawn up, that white can play very simple trade down chess, exchange chess. He regains the exchange, and then after queen f1 he also proposes the queen exchange. And then in the long run he must be winning any type of endgame if black acknowledges to the exchange of queens, because of the number of weak pawns, and also the fact that white's king in any endgame is really quite close to those weak pawns, and this is already a passed pawn, and this is already a passed pawn. So this is also a winning position for white. Good. Well, back to the game, where bishop f4 was not played, but the slightly more modest bishop e3 blocking black's passed pawn for the moment. And now I think Nakamura makes the final and losing mistake in this game. He plays here h5. Better would have been to have played something like queen a6, maybe just envisaging moves such as queen d3 later on, but most notably getting out of the way of the attack of bishop f4 later on, possibly. But instead of that, after bishop e3, he played h6, h5. Now we can understand why he plays this move, because there was always either this bishop h6 sacrifice when f6 would have been weak, or there is this exchange sacrifice, rook takes f6, after which the bishop could take on h6, right? But it's, you know, going from one trouble to another, because now the pawn has become a target for the queen. So what do we have to do for the queen to land at h5? Well, sooner or later we'll just have to get rid of the knight, and then our queen can enter on the king side while simultaneously eating this important kingside pawn. So now, with the pawn on h5, Anand indeed goes for bishop f4. Now this forces the queen away from either the defense of the bishop on c7 or the knight on f6. And here Anand plays rook takes f6, of course. Now it doesn't make any sense to play this move in between, because the rook would recapture and then all of a sudden he would be down a piece. So after rook takes f6, g takes f6 was the answer. But now simply bishop takes c7, queen takes c7, and yes, indeed, queen takes h5. Now you may wonder, why is this a winning position? Or why is this so fantastic for white that Anand wanted to play this? Now let's take a look. There is a number of advantages for white in the position. First of all, he's not really down the exchange. He has bishop plus a pawn, right? And as pointed out before, this pawn is already a pass pawn, this pawn is already a pass pawn. So materially, I think he's doing quite alright. But that's not the only thing. Of course, his queen is in black king's face, and the black king is incredibly insecure with both the g and the h files being opened up. Now, also, we should point out that black's king is very immobile because of the fact that there is no exit stage left. He has to go through all these rooks which are clogging up each other, and the doubled pawns which are clogging up each other, which means that really black's king is doomed to stay on the king side. And that also means that white has actually time to bring in his remaining troops, most notably the rook, to the f-file, for instance over here, to simply deliver a checkmate. Now this looks like it's a very slow plan, but as pointed out, black's king is even slower. Black's king has great difficulty getting out of the danger zone, and that's why white feels very comfortable playing down the exchange. Okay, so having said that, of course also the pawns in and of itself are very weak. I mean, it's very likely that white will soon pick up one or maybe even two of those pawns when he would even have a material advantage. And also well, obviously any endgames where he would have a material advantage, or where the pawn structure would be left like this, would probably be very favorable for him. Now, that's a lot, and it's not even everything, because chess is first and foremost a very concrete game, and white has a very serious threat. Can you see what the serious threat is? It has to do with the Italian bishop and the fact that black had to recapture earlier with d5 takes e4. Yes, the pin, you've probably seen it by now, on the f7 pawn makes queen g6 a threat. After that move, king h8 would be followed, and already there would go the first pawn. So that's very nasty, very nasty. So that led me to investigate a move that was not played in the game by Nakamura, namely the move king g7, which prevents queen g6. Well, then simply a play would have continued with queen g4, pushing the king to the h file, where he is even less mobile, and then all that really remains to be done is bring in the final troops. Let's say black could defend here with rook g8, but then with some precise moves, queen h4 check, king g7, king f6, king f8, white can very simply deliver a checkmate now. It's very similar to what we call an epaulette mate, but in this case it's queen f7, queen f7, rook f7, very nice. The proper epaulette mate, by the way, is where the rooks are lined up like that with the king, and the queen being in front delivering the checkmate. That's the proper epaulette mate. But here this one is also very funny, right? So we can see how quickly things can go completely wrong on those weakened kingside squares. But after rook f1, there is a more tenacious defense, and it's queen b6. Now, I always advise my students to, after any opponent's move, ask yourself the question, what has changed in the position and what does it mean? So what does that queen move actually do? Now, I think there are at least two functions, and you may want to pause the video and figure out for yourself what the two functions are, and then I'll come back and compare answers. Okay, well, let's compare answers. The queen is protecting the f6 pawn, but also the queen is pinning the d4 pawn. Okay, you say, well, what does that have to do with the price of rice in China? Pinning my d4 pawn, big deal, you know, it's very well protected. What do I have to do with the e5 square, for instance, that I'm pinned, or the d5 square? I don't need to run up my pawn right now immediately. You know, it will happen later in the endgame or whenever I want to do it. I also don't want to block my bishop immediately, so I don't need it now. I just need my pawn there, you know, because this is just an absolutely beautiful shield, which keeps black's pieces out from attacking the white position. Well, still it is very important that currently the pawn is pinned. Because if white were now to play the completely logical rook f5 with the idea of delivering checkmate, all according to plan, then it turns out that black has a very nasty counter. Rook e5. This rook cannot be taken because of the fact that the pawn is pinned. And it also counters the rook. And if black manages to exchange those rooks, then he will have gotten rid of one of his lousy rooks for the very strong attacking white rook. Now white will probably still be winning when he's not exchanging this rook and he's playing something like rook f4, but this is not ideal. This is not what you want to allow such a defensive resource, rook e5. So in this case, after queen b6, white needs to be a little bit smarter, and instead of bringing the rook to f5, he now has to switch his pieces around a little bit. He should go here with queen f5, and now we see that after king g7, rook f4 is strong. But you may say to yourself, again rook e5, right? Yes, but now it's just simply mate in 3 because we have rook g4 check, forcing the king to the h file, rook h4 check, forcing the king back, and now with tempo we are controlling the h7 square 2 times, and queen h7 is checkmate. And note that black's king still is hampered by these horribly placed immobile pieces of black on f8, f7 and f6. So this is then how Anand probably would have won the game. So, well, to cut a long story short, that's why after queen h5 this position really is winning for white. Okay, well, Nakamura didn't throw in the towel yet. He tried to stir up some trouble with e3, right, which is his only trump. He didn't put his rook for nothing behind the pass pawn, and he is just saying to white, well, deal with that one. Well, dealing with that one, Anand did. Because it did allow queen g6 check, right? King h8, king f6 check, king g8, king g6, king h8. Just toying with him. He already has the draw, but he's of course winning also here. Queen h6, king g8, and now a very, very nice switch. Very subtle. Of course, the move e4, e3 has opened up another very important attacking diagonal. And now all of a sudden queen h7 is the threat. Well, what can he do against that? He has to move his f-pawn so that the queen now defends that h7 square. But moving the f-pawn has now completely opened up the Italian diagonal. So Anand switches back with bishop b3 check, and now really the only defensive move is rook f7. Aha! But that ensures white of regaining the exchange. And when he has regained the exchange, he can simply play positionally because he is already up 2 pawns. So we can just start playing the straight down game, the exchange game again, and go into a winning endgame. Rook e1. Okay, queen e7, protecting that pass pawn. Let's not forget that this pawn was attacked twice, but now it's very simple. Queen g6 check, king f8, exchanging everything here on f7, and the final move. Maybe you want to find it yourself. It's a very typical endgame move. Pause the video or not. King g2. Of course, what the king wants to do is just walk to the e pawn, eat that pawn alive, and then he would be up even 3 pawns. So here Nakamura resigned. He could maybe still have tried something like f4, but we take that pawn, and then after king f6, king f3, rook h8, counter-attacking h2. White will very calmly play something like rook e2, and he would be up 3. Well, already, yeah, he's up 3 pawns now, and this check I don't think it really helps, because I'll just play king e4, and you know, I'll just start moving my pawns and everything, and this one will also fall sooner or later. So completely winning position for white. Okay, I've tried to keep this video a little bit short, but it's just in my DNA. I cannot help myself. When I start talking about chess, I need to explain so many things about positions that I think, I don't know, how long did it take? Let me see if there's a timer running here. Oh my god, I'm already talking for 30 minutes already. Well, 28 and a half to be precise, half an hour. Okay, so I think soon it's time to stop talking. So what's left to say? Yes, let's introduce the following acronym: SLC, St. Louis Chess. Please subscribe, like, or comment. Okay, well, hope to see you in the next video. Thank you for watching this one, and till next time. Bye bye.